What's going on, guys? Doomwick here, and welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where you get to watch me watching somebody else, watching me, watching you, watching me. We're looking at the metagame, all right? That's what we're doing today. That's what we do in the series, Modern, Standard, Pioneer. We'll take a look, and we will see what the heck people were playing. We mostly do Magic Online challenges, but sometimes there are some paper events that we kind of interweave into, is that a word? Interweave? Weave into the proceedings, and then at the very end of each metagame segment, we take a look and see if we can find the spice. So, first and foremost, before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you all for the support on this series over, I don't even know how long we've been doing it, like at least 6, maybe 7 months. And it seems to be a pretty big hit. So thank you guys for supporting the channel. If you're new and you want to see more content like this, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and let me know in the comment section down below, what was your favorite deck from today's episode? We'll go ahead and say that. Let me know in the comments. With all that said, let us get started, as we always do, with Modern. And honestly, right now, I never thought I'd be saying this, but I think Modern's the healthiest format and maybe the best format right now, question mark. So Boros Energy last week was 19.5%. That number is down to 16.3. And one thing that I want to highlight here as sort of potentially a big response to the Boros Energy deck, even though it's not nearly as oppressive as it once was, Mono Blue Belcher. Last week, 2.7%. This week, 10.1%. That is a massive, massive uptick. And historically, Belcher has been one of the better decks against Boros Energy. So if you were specifically looking to metagame for Boros in particular, and maybe less so Prowess and Dimir and that kind of stuff, Belcher is certainly a deck that you would look towards. Speaking of Prowess, 10.2% last week, up 13.2% this week. So a little bit of an uptick, not anything really too significant. Some of the Boros numbers just kind of got swapped over to Izzet, and then people played less of the other stuff and more Belcher, really is kind of what I'm looking at. Domain Zoo did have a noticeable uptick. I don't even see it on the graph last week. Looks like it's somewhere in that the 1.5% to 2% range, and now it's up to 6.6% this week. One thing that I will mention, you'll notice there is Mono Blue Belcher, and then one just labeled Belcher. This is the Mono Red version. So this 1.4% of Belcher, that is the red, kind of more storm-based version with like Stormscale Scion, the red rituals, Ruby Medallion. And I do want to make sure that those are separated from the Blue Belcher deck, because really, the blue version is kind of almost like more of a control deck, where it's playing a whole bunch of free counter spells like Flare of Denial and Force of Negation, sometimes Commandeer, sometimes Subtlety. So a bunch of interaction, and then sort of maybe setting up for like a turn 4, turn 5 kill, as opposed to Red Belcher that's just, here's my thing on turn 3, can you beat it? But with all that said, let's see if we can find the spice in Modern from the weekend. And we are going to kick things off with, you may have noticed in the winners section, a deck labeled Mono White Control took down a Modern challenge. And I mean, I would be remiss to not go through this episode without looking at it. So shout out to Aussie51, who won the challenge with this. I still don't really know what to call it. Like, do we call this Mono White Ponza? So the concept is, I think, you have a lot of good interaction against Boros, where you have March of Otherworldly Light to exile their 1-drops and maybe a Johnny's, Path to Exile, which can help exile Flage, Wrath of the Skies, 4 copies, which, I mean, if you've ever cast this card against Boros Energy, their entire board dies, and it's also very good against a lot of the other decks that would normally be good against Boros, namely decks that have Urza Saga, because the Wrath cleans up the Saga as well. So you have good interaction, you have enough ways to kill Cori-steel Cutter, so you don't just die to Prowess, where you have Skyclave Apparition and March of Otherworldly Light. And then on top of that, as we mentioned, Mono Blue Belcher going from basically non-existent 2% last week to 10% this week. You have a lot of good cards against Belcher decks. You have 4 White Orchid Phantom, and then if you move over to the lands, we have 4 Demolition Field, 4 Field of Ruin, and 4 Ghost Quarters. And the Belcher decks, by nature, can't play basic lands. So you effectively have 16 just strip mines / stone rains against them, and they really just don't get to cast spells. On top of the fact that you even have a couple of Karns to shut off their Belchers and go find more sideboard cards. Yeah, I don't know. This one is interesting. I don't know if this one is necessarily going to stick, and I think a lot of the reason that Ozzy played this deck in the challenge was just because of the metagame, right? Of how much Belcher there was, and this is more of a response to that than really anything else, I think. But nonetheless, pretty cool list. Another deck that we've seen a little bit of a resurgence of lately is Living End. Partly due to the fact that Gabriel Nassif has been streaming a good amount of it, and he believes in the deck. I didn't get a chance to look at his exact list, so let me know in the comments how close this one is to his. But a lot of the lists that I was seeing were Bant, right? They were mostly Simic with some white sideboard cards like Clarion, Conqueror, and Teferi Time Raveler. This was a very, very different take on Living End than I had seen in basically any of the other lists. So this one is not playing any white cards, and instead of splashing white as their third color, we're splashing black. So first and foremost, Overlord of the Baelmerk, very good at putting creatures into the graveyard. And importantly, if you Baelmerk on turn 2, you can mill over some number of creatures for your Living End, but also go get a Shardless agent. So Baelmerk being able to find Shardless is pretty cool. You can also find Halo Forager if you already have a Living End in the graveyard. If you milled it over with the Baelmerk, pick up Forager, go get Living End. Or just if you go for a Cascade spell, it doesn't work out for some reason or another, then you have the Living End in the graveyard, then you can Halo Forager it. Couple of Disciple of Freyalise, in addition to the Sink into Stupor. This one's kind of cool because it is a land, right? So it sort of acts as just more mana sources in your deck, which you kind of want anyways. But also, importantly, if you mill this off of Overlord of the Baelmerk, it's now in your graveyard to be able to get back with a Living End later on. And the ability of being able to sacrifice another creature and gain X, draw X, where X is that creature's power. You have a lot of high power creatures, right? Troll of Khazad-dûm, Generous Ent, Curator of Mysteries, Colossal Sky Turtle. So a bunch of ways to draw a ton of cards with Disciple, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then Rakshasa's Bargain. This is like the stock up that puts the cards into the graveyard. Pretty good with the Living End. So very interesting take on the Living End archetype, and one that if you're into Living End, you might want to give this one a look. All right, I don't usually take a look at some of the more established archetypes in this particular segment, but I've really had to give a shout out to this Domain Zoo list, MSPOR. I don't recall the original user, who was like sometime last week. I think they won back-to-back challenges or something, but they have been playing this list and just tearing up challenges left and right. And it's the same list. So they're playing 2 Nishoba, 2 Phage, 4 Wild Nacatl, the Leyline, Binding, and Guild Pack package, 2 Spectral Denial, which is the new counterspell from Tarkir Dragonstorm that effectively costs less for each creature with power 4 or greater, 2 Stubborn Denial, and then just kind of the usual 4 Tribal Flames, 4 Scion of Draco, 4 Territorial Kavu. And again, I just wanted to highlight this list because I think that Domain Zoo historically has had a decent matchup against Boros in the games where it has Leyline Scion. It is very difficult for Boros to interact with Leyline plus Scion outside of Static Prison on the Leyline of the Guild Pact. So again, if you have a bit of a Boros problem, might be a reason to give this deck a try, and one that maybe I'll have to give myself a try at an upcoming RCQ. And then last but not least, in the Modern section, we have Far From Mythic in 28th place here with Grixis Frog? ? So we've taken the blue-black core of Orcish Bowmasters, Psychic Frog, Tamiyo, and some counter spells, right? Counterspell, Fatal Push, Force of Negation, that kind of stuff. But instead of leaning more in on stuff like Murktide Region or Aboran Oculus, our extra threats are just Ragavans. Because Ragavan's good? Question mark? I would be a little bit skeptical of playing Ragavan given how much prowess there is in the metagame right now. It's what the maybe second or third most played deck. So I'd be a little bit skeptical of running Ragavans into Lava Darts, but more importantly, Red also gives you some better interaction, where you get Flame of Anor to help fight over Cori-steel Cutter, and Lightning Bolt, just as sort of a catch-all kill spell, and the combination of Lightning Bolt and Snapcaster Mage can steal games that you otherwise would not be able to win due to the lower threat count in decks like this. There's also one of Jace the Mind Sculptor. Some people just can't get away from it. I'm not saying it's correct or incorrect, but I'm just saying that the people who put one Jace in their deck, they're going to put one Jace in their deck regardless of whether it's good or bad. And then the one Kaido, Bane of Nightmares. Red, also importantly, gives you some very potent sideboard cards, notably Pyroclasm and Meltdown. So I'm not necessarily interested in a blue-black deck per se, but if I were interested in blue-black, I think this Crixus version might be a decent place to take it. And with that, that's going to do it for Modern. Let us move on over to Pioneer and see how that format's looking. Okay, not so bad. I mean, if you have been following this series for a long time, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, it might have been even longer than that, there was one point where Pioneer was 31% mono red mice, and it seems like we're maybe trending a little bit towards that because we've gone from 13.5 to 21.4, and it won half of the challenges this weekend. But, you know, maybe we'll see if the metagame can readjust itself next week, and maybe people can stop being lazy. So in any case, Izzet Phoenix gone from 14.1 to 12%. Mono Black, the exact same, just stayed at 14.1. That's pretty funny. Celestia Angels, roughly the same. Lotus Field, that was a pretty big increase from 4.7% to 9.9, more than doubled. And I don't... It's interesting because if mono red is increasing in this large of a number, that usually has been a pretty rough matchup for Lotus Field. So I don't know if the Lotus Field players maybe figured out the mono red matchup, or if a bunch of Lotus Field players just said, hey, we're going to try and dodge mono red this week? Question mark. Izzet Prowess gone from 4.2 to 5.2. Spirits from 3.6 to 5.7. Gruul Prowess non-existent to 3.6. We will take a look at that one because it did win a challenge, and I more so just wanted to showcase with Pioneer, there's a lot less innovation, so we're going to be taking a look at maybe some more established archetypes in the spice column. So not as much spice in the Pioneer queues, mostly just because of how good mono red is. But speaking of spice, let us move on over to that section where we're going to take a look at some deck lists. And the first one I have for you is actually Spice from Claudio, a frequent regular here on Watching the Meta series, and Claudio has brought to us Esper Legends from Standard 4 years ago, 3 years. How long ago is Legends? I don't even remember. Streets of New Capenna. Let me know in the comments. I get lost. I lose track of my years sometimes. But to be completely honest with you, this is legitimately a deck that you could play in Standard when Raffine was legal. I can't remember the timing on when Bat came out prior to rotation, but I feel like Bat was legal before Innistrad and Streets of New Capenna rotated. I guess we didn't have Fatal Push, but I think we literally had everything else, which is kind of funny. Well, Fatal Push and Thoughtseize. But yeah, the concept here is you have Raffine Scheming Seer, which is 3 mana 1/4 flying ward. When you attack, your attacking creature connives X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So you use Raffine, which has a little bit of built-in protection with the ward, and you pair that with a bunch of other good legends. And the way you facilitate your mana base is you kind of tie it all together with Plaza of Heroes, where this fixes mana for legends. You have a whole bunch of legends like Dennick, which turns off the graveyard. Shieldred turns off drawing cards. Skrelv turns off removal. Thalia prevents your opponent from casting spells. A lot of your legends have sort of like built-in ways to either protect themselves or prolong the game, and then you eventually take over by making a huge flyer with Rafine. We also now have Kaido, which is quite good in this deck because you can get through with like a Bat or a Skrelv and then use the Kaido to just press your advantage even further. And on top of all of that, we get really good interaction with Fatal Push and Thoughtseize. So interesting take on the sort of, I mean, this is really the first time I've seen a Rafine deck in Pioneer in quite some time, but shout out to Claudia. I definitely had to highlight this one, maybe toot my own horn a little bit, but shout out to Randy Woodson, 21st place. This is, I believe, including the mana base, the same exact deck list that I just posted a video with not too long ago. This is going to go up on Wednesday, so it would be, I think, 6 days prior to today's video. So if you missed that one, you're going to want to go check that one out. But yeah, Metalwork Colossus, I went over the whole deck in detail, but TLDR, you get a bunch of artifacts in play, like stuff like Brass Knuckles, Leyline Axe, Moonsnare, Prototype, Simulacrum Synthesizer. Use those to discount your Metalwork Colossus. Use Sanctum of Ugin to go find more Metalwork Colossus, and just kind of go from there. It's a really sweet looking deck, and yeah, like I said, I just wanted to highlight this one again, maybe toot my own horn a little bit, but go check out that video. It was a lot of fun. So I mentioned we're going to take a look at a couple of established deck lists in Pioneer. I wouldn't necessarily say that Izzet Prowess is an established deck in Pioneer, rather, excuse me. Well, certainly not like it is in Standard. But at least in Pioneer, it's pretty, I was going to say it's noticeably different, but the big upgrades that you get from the Standard version into the Pioneer version are an additional 1-drop in the form of Soulscar Mage. More 1-drops equals good. Kumano Faces Kakazan has always just been a fantastic, one of the better, if not the, not going to say the best, but one of the better red 1-drops printed in quite some time. This card is worth a lot of damage. So it enters, it deals 1, cast your next creature spell, that gets an additional counter, and then you flip it, and it has haste and attack for 2. That could potentially be 1 mana, 4 damage. But even if they like kill it the turn after, it's so much value. We get Consider, which is pretty good, because that pairs, well, I was going to say it pairs with Treasure Cruise, but very interesting to see a blue-red list without Cruise. I kind of understand it, certainly with stuff like Izzet Phoenix, where you have more cantrips and the self-mills and lighting axes, makes more sense to play Cruise in a deck like that. Phoenix wants to play a longer game anyways, but this deck is looking to play a considerably shorter game than Phoenix, so I think I maybe understand cutting the Cruises, even though it sounds kind of crazy. But yeah, Consider is just a good cantrip here with Sleight of Hand, cards in the graveyard. Wizard's Lightning, another good upgrade. So yeah, interesting looking. This is sort of the way that people are building Prowess for the most part in Pioneer. And again, it's just a little weird to not see Cruise, because that card is pretty good. And then the other way to play Prowess from Mateus F34. This is the list that won one of the challenges this weekend. I'm not going to say mostly the same, because this one is actually playing Emberheart Challenger. The other list was not. Still playing Swiftspear and Soulscar Mage. Basically playing Emberheart Challenger instead of Slickshot Show Off. Playing Questing Druid instead of Balmor. And then really that is the only green card in the main deck. There are some sideboard cards like Heritage Reclamation and Pick Your Poison, and I believe that is it. So really not a ton of green cards here, but just kind of the best of the best, right? The best 1-drops with Swiftspear, Soulscar Mage, and Kumano. The best interaction, Burst Lightning, Play with Fire, Reckless Rage is kind of cool. Very good with all the Prowess creatures, because you target your thing and it already gets to 3 toughness. And 4 Light Up the Stage and 4 Questing Druid to make it so we never run out of gas for Cori-steel Cutter. So if you're looking to maybe utilize those Cori-steel Cutters in an alternate format for potentially reasons that may or may not happen, then maybe Pioneer is the place to do so. All right, with all that said, speaking of Standard, let's go take a look at Cori-steel Cutter, the format. Well, at least it's not 38% prowess. All right, so jokes aside, Yeah, I mean, looking at last week's graph, it was legitimately 38.3% of the top 32 metagames. I had a feeling it was going to be lower than that, and I don't think we'll ever see anything like that again. That being said, Is It Prowess and Mono Red Aggro basically neck and neck in terms of 1A and 1B, trying to jockeying for position. It does make sense to see this massive spike in Mono Red, given that it just won the Hartford Regional Championships. I will say, basically every single Mono Red deck list at this point is main decking Magebane Lizard to help fight against the Prowess decks. Dimir midrange, roughly about the same, 8.6, small uptick there to 10.7. Omniscience from 7 to 8.9, again, small uptick. Orzhov Pixie, more significant uptick, but nothing too crazy. Azorius Control, again, Azorius Control, Orzhov Pixie, Omniscience. These decks are, in theory, have a good match or decent matchup against Prowess, so slight uptick in those sort of makes sense. And I think more importantly, they maybe even have a better mono red matchup than they do a Prowess matchup. So with the uptick in mono red as a natural response to Prowess, these decks being increased in size also does make a lot of sense. And then everything else is mostly just the same. I mean, Oculus took a bit of a dip here, Jeskai Control, Orzhov Demons, but yeah, I mean, really this is just sort of dual decks Prowess versus mono red at this point. But that's not to say that there wasn't some spice that we have to take a look at. And we are going to start it off with the spice of life, some would say. DSK Beowulf, there was a standard showcase qualifier. Now, for those who don't know what showcase qualifier means, there is a series of tournaments on Magic Online called the Magic Online Championships, and they're sort of things that you have to qualify for a qualifier, and this is essentially the first or second step in that regard. So the top 8 players of this event get to qualify for a 32-person event. The winner of that event gets to qualify for the Pro Tour and win a whole bunch of money. I think maybe a Worlds invite too, I'm not positive. But basically the pinnacle of MTGO competition, and this list got 4th place. So it is Boros midrange, and you want to talk about people who are definitely not lazy in terms of deck building. This deck list is just essentially built to counter the metagame, right? You have 4 Magebane Lizard in the main deck, good against Prowess, 4 Screaming Nemesis in the main deck, good against Mono Red, Sheltered by Ghosts, good in both matchups, Lightning Helix, good in both matchups, Lorna the Third Path to kill Cori-steel Cutters, Voice of Victory, good against Azorius Control. So effectively, this person has taken, what they perceive to be the 3 most played decks and just built a deck to beat all 3 of them. And they did that. They got 4th place. And that's awesome. I think that's pretty cool. So it's sort of like a mid-range deck. Bruce Tarl is a card that says when it enters or attacks, you exile the top card of your library. If it's a land, you make a 2/2 Ox creature, and then otherwise you can cast it until the end of your next turn. Gives all of your Oxen double strike, which is funny because the tokens that it makes have double strike, but also Soulstone Sanctuary and Restless Bivouac also count as Oxen. So yeah, really, really cool looking list from DSK Beowulf. Potentially maybe look for a video in the future because I probably got to give this one a shot. Sticking with the showcase qualifier, so 16th place in that event. I don't remember how many people. Let me see if I can scroll down here to see the total player count. Does it say up top? 232 players, so a pretty sizable event here. And Riojund got top 16 with this take on a Boron Oculus. We've seen a couple of these in the past. They're Dimir. The black is mostly you're utilizing No One Left Behind as your main reanimation spell, which is normally 5 mana, but it costs 3 less if it targets a creature with mana value 3 or less. So ways to get back your Oculus. You have Kitsa Otterball Elite to help loot and put Oculus into the graveyard, along with Steamcore Scholar. And then you also have sort of this Prof's side plan where a lot of your cards incidentally draw. Again, Kitsa Otterball Elite, Steamcore Scholar, Winter Night Stories. So you have a good number of ways to draw cards to help juice up the Profs. Winter Night, also a discard outlet for Oculus. And then I think the big reason to play black in this deck over basically any other color combination like Jeskai, which, by the way, Jeskai Oculus has sort of fallen off the face of the earth, is Duress. And Duress is one of the better cards you can play against Prowess because it's good early to take their Cori-steel cutter, and it's good in the mid to late game because you can fight over their stock-ups. So, very good card. Black kill spells also fantastic, cut down and go for the throat. And then Quag Feast to help mill and have more kill spells. So really interesting take on the Oculus deck. And again, Jeskai may be falling off the face of the earth, but maybe Dimir is the hero we need. So the Montreal Regional Championships did take place this past weekend. That event was won by Azorius Omniscience. But a deck from the top 8 of that event. Now look, we can't go an entire segment without at least showcasing one Cori-steel cutter deck, but this is not your grandma's Cori-steel cutter deck. So shout out to Kevin Anktel, who top-8'd the Canadian Regional Championships with this deck list. And what I like about this is we've essentially just taken the creatures out of Prowess and turned it into a control deck. This is, for all intents and purposes, Cori control, which is weird to say. Or I guess you could call it Teamer Otters without the Otters, because there's no Flood Caller or Enduring Vitality. But essentially, you're just taking the best threats, which are Cori-steel Cutter and Storm Chaser's Talent, pairing that with the best interaction, the bounce spells, torches, and a couple of copies of Roaring Furnace, and then utilizing Up the Beanstalk as your main card advantage engine instead of Stock Up, because of how good that card works with Town, and then to a lesser extent Hearth Elemental, which is sort of the deck stock up, where later on in the game you have a graveyard full of spells, you top deck Hearth Elemental, 2 mana, empty-handed, draw 2 cards, 1 mana, play the Elemental, triggers your Beanstalk, gives you a Cutter token. So yeah, it really just is sort of like a bigger Prowess deck. But can we even call it a Prowess deck, even though it has Storm Chasers and Cori-steel Cutter? I don't want to call it a Prowess deck because it doesn't feel like it. But yeah, this is one that I'm definitely going to have to try myself, for sure. Really, really sweet looking deck from Kevin. And last, but certainly not least, to close out today's video from Owl1013, they made all the way to the finals of a standard challenge with Rakdos. And there's nothing crazy about this deck, right? It's just the good cards. 4 Preacher of the Schism, 4 Fear of Missing Out. You have your Demon package with 2 Archfiend of the Dross, 2 Unholy Annex, a couple of Soulstone Sanctuaries, good interaction, Abrade, Anoint, Cut Down, Go for the Throw, Torch the Tower, 4 Duress, couple of Tursas, couple of Karcies. Like, there's really nothing fancy going on about this deck list. They just said, I want to take the mono black deck, and I want to splash Fear of Missing Out and Torch the Tower and a couple of sideboard cards, and that's what we have. Really cool looking deck list here. Another one that I'm probably going to have to give a try at some point during the week. And yeah, nothing crazy. Just Rakdos good cards. Who'da thunk? And that, my friends, is going to wrap up another episode of Watching the Meta. Hopefully, by this time next week, we will be playing some Final Fantasy, and we will be bringing you some awesome Final Fantasy content, and I can't wait to dig my teeth into that set. This video is going out on Wednesday. I'm going to be recording a Final Fantasy spoiler video. Well, I'm going to be recording it right now. That's going to go up, I believe, this Saturday, so you're not going to want to miss my picks for the best cards from Final Fantasy for Standard. And with all that said, again, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the content. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought. And until next time, adios.